Today I got probably one of the craziest story times I've received in a while, so just sit back, relax, and let's get right into it. So we'll call the subscriber James, and James was in 5th grade, and James had a 5th grade teacher who was definitely going through the works, to say the least. James was only kind of aware that, him and his, wife, or I guess maybe ex-wife, I'm not totally sure, were going through some issues because James's mom mentioned something about it very briefly. More or less, James's mom said, "Oh, be nice to Mr. Davenport." We're going to call the teacher that, by the way. For some reason, and James is like, "Oh, why?" And James's mom was like, "Oh, he's I don't know, he's having issues with his marriage or whatever." I don't know how James's mom knows, but, moms kind of just know all the gossip, how it is. So James's mom, James was a little bit aware of this, but Mr. Davenport, up until this day, right, he hadn't said anything to the class about, his marriage or any of his issues. But I guess today, the fateful day, I guess Mr. Davenport really just had enough and he felt like he needed to tell someone about it. So anyways, on this specific day, James walks into class like it's a normal day, any other day, and he gets in there and he sits down. And Mr. Davenport is, he's not there. He's late. And this is kind of weird because, Mr. Davenport is never late. He's always, there 30 minutes before anyone else. So everyone's kind of, a little weirded out / concerned because they have no idea where Mr. Davenport is. And, he's known for being super early all the time. Eventually, right, Mr. Davenport walks into class and he just looks like a mess. It looks like he hasn't slept for the last 48 hours. He's just not looking good. And, even though this is a class of 5th graders, they all have enough, I don't know, social awareness to know that, something isn't right. But, no, I mean, no one in that class is going to say anything. They're not going to be like, "Hey, Mr. Davenport, you look like you like garbage today. What's up?" No one's going to be that kid and say that. So they all kind of just sit there and wait for class to begin like normal. And Mr. Davenport sits at his desk. And he just kind of sits there and slumps down all defeated. And everyone there is kind of confused. I mean, half the kids were told by their parents, "Hey, just a heads up, your teacher's kind of going through it, so be extra nice." But the other half, the kids, weren't even told. And, the kids that were told were kind of, okay and probably didn't think anything of it. And Mr. Davenport is like, "Guys, we're going to have a very special lesson plan today." And, James in his head was like, "Oh, we going to watch a movie? Are we going to talk about, a really fun piece of history?" What do you mean, special plan? Mr. Davenport kind of throws them a curveball. He's just like, "Today we're not going to be talking about history," because this was a history class, by the way. He's like, "You know what? Today I'm going to teach you something about the real world. I'm going to teach you about, something you can actually use and not some stupid dates or whatever." Immediately, the entire class was totally thrown off by this because Mr. Davenport was always one of those, kind of very upbeat, very happy, very, "Yay, learning is fun, guys." But today he really just comes in and says, "Dude, everything I've been teaching you is, completely, useless. Let me actually teach you something that you're going to be able to use." So, James and the rest of the class kind of already realized that today was not going to be a normal day, but they did not necessarily expect it to go the way it did, which, I mean, I don't think anyone possibly could have. It was kind of a ridiculous day. But anyways, Mr. Davenport goes to the front of the class. He says, "All right, guys, so marriage. A wonderful thing, right? I mean, when you load up a movie, you load up a TV show, and you think of marriage, you're just seeing, butterflies, rainbows, pots of gold, wonderful, happy, smiling people. Wrong. False. I need you guys to take this preconceived notion that is in your mind and tear it to shreds." At this point, James is like, "Oh, God, this is not going to be good." Look, James was in 5th grade, but he was he was socially aware enough, as I was saying. He's socially aware enough to know that, something's not right here. And, yes, he could just tell that this class was not going to be a normal class. And Mr. Davenport was like, "So, what did you guys take away from this so far?" And he's asked one of the kids. He's like, "Ben." And Ben's like, "Marriage isn't, good." And Mr. Davenport's like, "Ben, perfect. Thank you for paying attention. So, why is marriage not perfect?" And this is where things get pretty bad. This is where really it gets really bad after this point, so just a heads up. But he's like, Mr. Davenport's like, "So why is marriage not good, right? Well, if you choose a wife, right, and she's unfaithful and sleeps with your neighbor, well, that would be a reason why marriages aren't great. The entire class goes silent. And Mr. Davenport kind of stops after that sentence. I think he started to realize that he just explained to the class of 5th graders that his marriage was failing because his wife slept with his neighbor. That's definitely not totally inappropriate for, a 5th grade class setting. But almost immediately, right, Mr. Davenport is kind of like, oh, shoot, like, what did I just say? Mr. Davenport, who was kind of in a mood of, like, I don't know, he was kind of, like, he completely snaps out of it, and he's like, guys, I'm so, like, he just starts, like, shaking his head. He's like, guys, I'm so sorry, like, I'm really going through it, I'm really struggling, I'm really having a tough time, I should not have brought any of this information, like, I should not have told you any of this. Like, I'm so sorry. Like, let's just have a fun movie day for the rest of class. James is just sitting there taking this all in because 1 second, right, he comes in, Mr. Davenport starts talking about how marriage is awful and your wife will literally sleep with your neighbor if you're not paying attention, right? And then a second later, he is like begging for their forgiveness and saying that they're going to have a fun movie day today. But I mean, James is not complaining. I mean, hey man, I love those movie days. Like, I wouldn't be complaining either, dude. Real quick, comment class down below if you made it this far into the video. I'll try and heart as many comments as possible that say that. This is the secret word of the day. I'll be able to heart more comments than I have in the last couple days because I'm officially done with exams. I survived. You'll love to see it. But anyways, right, James is kind of just sitting there and, Mr. Davenport is going to put on a movie. He's like, all right, class, like, I got a really fun movie planned. I used to love this one as a kid. I'm sure you guys are going to love this movie too. Like, this is going to be so much fun, right? And he's like, you know what? Can we also just, like, all agree? Like, can we just all come in agreement? Just not to mention what happened today to anyone. Mr. Davenport will probably get in a lot of trouble for that, guys. And it was a genuine mistake, and he's really going through it. And losing, if Mr. Davenport, he starts talking about himself in the third person, which is kind of weird, but he's like, and if Mr. Davenport was to lose his job, his only source of income, and have to go through, this BS with his wife, and then he's like, all right, that would not be good. And at this point, James is starting to realize that Mr. Davenport kind of crossed the line when he over-explained about, the intimate parts of his life, and that he was starting to fear that if any kid, like, told the principal or staff or parent or anything, that he could legitimately get fired. So that his plan was that he was going to have a really fun day with them, have a nice movie or whatever, and ask them very politely not to mention this to anyone. And James, he really did, like, mess with Mr. Davenport. Like, Mr. Davenport was a very fun teacher. He was very, he made learning fun. He was very chill. He was understanding. And obviously, Mr. Davenport kind of just had, like, a mini mental breakdown, and that's not really his fault in James's mind. So James was like, yeah, no, I'm not going to tell anyone. And the rest of the class was kind of in agreement, or at least it seemed like that, they just weren't going to tell anyone about this little incident. And the rest of the class was really fun. They watched a movie. Mr. Davenport was, like, having some fun activities. He's like, all right, you know what? I was planning to have homework today, but since today was kind of just, like, a weird day, we'll start normal class up tomorrow. Don't worry about it. Like, you guys have fun tomorrow, like, fun tonight or whatever. Whole class is like, let's go. No homework. It's a good day. And they're walking out of class, and this one kid, we're going to call him Ty, right? He comes up to James, and Ty and James are kind of friendly. James doesn't really go to a school with that big of a class, so he kind of knows everyone. Ty isn't, like, his best friend or anything, but he knows Ty on a pretty good basis. And Ty comes up to him, and he's like, hey, James, like, what happened today? Like, Mr. Davenport really kind of, like, overshared. I was thinking of going to the principal and explaining everything that happened. And James is like, dude, no, like, yes, Mr. Davenport really did cross the line, and he should not have said what he did. But at the same time, like, he's a really cool teacher. He was just like, it was a mistake. And if we tell anyone, he's most definitely going to lose his job, which is, like, his only source of income. And he's going through divorce, and he's a cool teacher. I'm not trying to get stuck with, like, a really terrible substitute. And, Ty's like, oh, I guess you got a point. Like, I guess I won't be telling anyone. Or so James thought, right? Because the next day, James comes in expecting Mr. Davenport to be sitting there, one of his favorite teachers, but no, it is a substitute teacher. And the substitute teacher's like, all right, class, open up to page 58 of the textbook. We will be reading chapters like 8 and 9. And James is just like, oh my God, like, whoa, 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 whoa. At first, James is thinking, okay, well, whatever, right? Mr. Davenport probably had to take some days off to deal with like the situation with his wife. Like, this is probably no big deal. But James starts to soon realizes that that is not the case at all. Because, the reason why, James realizes that, this is not going to be a temporary substitute teacher is when during the class, the substitute teacher makes a reference to how that, they'll like the sub will probably be their teacher for the rest of the year. And when James hears that, man, like his heart literally sinks because, he loved Mr. Davenport, and Mr. Davenport was probably one of his favorite teachers and made him like excited to learn. And this substitute teacher really did just come in and is just like forcing them to read pages out of a textbook. Like, the substitute teacher has no idea. It's not really the sub's fault. Like, they probably were just thrown into this, but they're doing a terrible job teaching. They're really just making it like the most dull and bland teaching possible. And James is starting to realize that, something happened to Mr. Davenport in which, he probably was not going to be coming back to being a teacher, aka he probably got fired, aka probably someone mentioned what happened in like class a couple days ago. So sure enough, right, when class ends, James immediately finds Ty and he's like, bro. And Ty's like, what? And James is like, just kind of gives him a look, and Ty's like, fine, yeah, all right, I told the principal. And James is like, bro, why? Why would you do it? And Ty's like, well, I don't think it was like super right of him to overshare like that. And James is like, dude, yeah, but the guy is fired now. Like, that guy is definitely not coming back. Like, how, like, he was a good teacher, right? And Ty's like, yeah, I guess, but, like, it was weird what he said. And James is like, yeah, it was weird what he said. But, he also said it once, and it was obviously a mistake. And now we're stuck with this really crappy sub. And Ty's like, all right, man, like, whatever. It's like, it's not my fault. And James is like, it kind of is. The truth is, right, Ty was totally in his right to report that because that was a weird thing for, Mr. Davenport to say. But James, the subscriber who sent him the story, was specifically not very happy about that at all. And it doesn't end there because James, the end of the day, his mom comes and picks him up, and his mom's like, hey, James, like, why didn't you tell me about that class you had with Mr. Davenport yesterday? And James is like, oh, like, I didn't really think much of it. And James's mom was like, oh, well, I'm seeing this thing on Facebook of these moms of people in your class, they're getting really mad and they're wanting to like take Mr. Davenport to court for like exposing such, I don't know, secrets about his marriage and like how inappropriate what he said was and how angry they are. And, James's mom is like, are you okay? And James is like, yes, Mom, I am fine. Actually, I'm kind of upset that, like, we have a new crappy sub. That was, like, one of my favorite teachers. And James's mom is like, yeah, I mean, I guess, but, like, Mr. Davenport was weird for what he said. And, James is like, yeah, I mean, fair, I guess. But, I'm not trying, like, I didn't really care. The rest of class didn't really care. And James's mom's like, well, I think it's just good for you to know that, like, all the moms, like, that there's, like, a petition going on, and, like, the moms are forming a group that they're going to try and pursue Mr. Davenport out of school. And, then James's mom goes on to say, oh, yeah, by the way, like, Mr. Davenport is no longer a school. His contract was terminated. And James kind of is like, James kind of knew that was the case, but he was kind of just sad to hear that. And James is like, why are you guys going after him? Like, he's lost everything, Mom. Like, he's in a terrible spot in his marriage, which is definitely over. He just lost his only source of income. Do we really need to dogpile on him? And James's mom's like, yeah, I mean, it's not me who's doing it. Like, I'm just watching the group and, like, showing some support just because, I don't know, I don't want the moms to hate me. But, yeah, it's more Ty's mom. And James is like, dude, Ty was the one who turned them in. And James' mom's like, oh, well, I mean, I guess that makes sense. Ty's mom is like the one who is really like leading the charge against, Mr. Davenport. But yeah, so while Mr. Davenport is still fired and does not return to the school, the group of like moms does not end up suing him or anything. It was a lot of empty talk. Eventually they weren't getting anywhere, so the group kind of just disbanded. But yeah, James apparently said that the substitute turned into the permanent teacher for the rest of the year. And James said that was probably one of his worst experiences in a classroom ever. Like, not what Mr. Davenport said, but the substitute's teaching. It was so dry, it was so bland, they obviously had no passion about what they were doing. I mean, they were a sub being forced into this situation on last minute, so, like, what can you expect? But James was like, yeah, the rest of that year was terrible. Click on the video on screen right now. I know you'll enjoy it. Just click it, do it.